And just a follow-up to that question, Ali, how do you propose Pakistan even go on to tackle this issue of not having any freedom of speech in the next 10 to 15 years?
Don't do it. Don't tackle it. That would be my advice. To move away slightly from the topic of free speech, Pakistan needs a few basic things. If we go back to Maslow's pyramid, we have people who are dying of malnutrition, people who are living in well-developed communities who don't have access to full electricity, clean water, heating, cooling. There's so many other things that we need to resolve before we even get talking about this aspect of free speech or the freedom to offend. And I see that when I go back to Pakistan, because what we do is we end up consuming American, British, Canadian media, and we say, oh, wow, what a wonderful value they have in that country. Why don't we just imprint it to our context? That is not contextually regionalist. That will not really work. Try to look at what context you exist in right now. So my advice, because I'm a political advisor in Pakistan and now in Canada as well, my advice is exactly the same. If you like something abroad, look at how it's developed. America has this, how old is 17th century? Almost 250-year-old history of this thought process developed. You're merely 70-something years old. You've had 3 coups. You've had countless wars with your neighbor. You don't really know where you stand yet. And what Pakistan has done is it's kind of divorced itself from 5,000, 6,000 years of Indian historic civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, and they're trying to create a new one where they're taking a religion from the Middle East, applying it to our context, and they're trying to create a new identity. The topic of free speech or free thought should be the last thing on the mind right now when it comes to Pakistan. Secure your water, secure your electricity, make sure there's no war, make sure your people are safe, and then start talking about it. I defer to Maslow's pyramid and a few other pyramids of social needs when it comes to this topic.
I wonder if I can agree with you in part and potentially push back on some of what you're saying. I think you're right. I think you're right that free speech is something that's contextualized, that's embedded within certain kinds of institutions and cultural, legal, and historical traditions. So you're certainly right about that. And another point you're right on is that it's something that requires a certain kind of practice. So, like any powerful tool, it's something that, I saw a question here. It says, is it good for peace sustainability to speak freely about anything, even something that might hurt others? And I think it's right to say that unleashing a powerful tool like free speech can also wreak havoc, can also be destructive, can indeed hurt people's feelings in a way that may not help advance the discourse. And so it's something that requires practice. It's something that requires developing along within supportive institutions, that requires developing along with a press and so forth, and having these kind of things of maybe a bootstrapping exercise where you try multiple institutions that are mutually reinforcing, that allow people to get the idea of what it's like to work with free speech and to sort of bolster their immune systems against criticism and so forth. Just to add one little thought to that, the idea that if you speak freely, it might hurt people's feelings. That's true. But if you don't allow free speech and then somebody comes along and they have, a charismatic demagogue who has a really good way of getting a bunch of people to believe something that they formerly hadn't even thought of, well, that can be even more dangerous because you won't even have been exposed to this supposedly hurtful idea. And so somebody can come along and just, get millions of people to go along with them because they have some superficially thoughtful argument that nobody's even heard and encountered before. So the idea is if you allow people to have their feelings get hurt rather than shrinking away and dissolving and having anarchy, sometimes that getting your feelings hurt is like getting a vaccine where it stings a little and then you go, well, then what's my counter argument? Or maybe how do I work on myself? How do I make sure that I don't melt in the face of any kind of hurtful comment? Maybe I need to work on my own attitudes and build my own arguments. And then you get a healthy body politic where now if people are saying hurtful things just for the sake of it, people can sort of identify that they're not contributing anything. But if somebody says something that maybe stings, but it has a bit of truth in it, well, now maybe you have the robustness of a epistemic immune system that you can actually correct some of your false beliefs, or come up with a better argument, or collaborate with the other person to come up with an argument that neither of you has even thought of. So I think a little bit of offensiveness, a little bit of free speech, a little bit of press, these things have to be in the air. I don't know that you get a whole country figured out and then you add some free speech on top. I think you've got to kind of, along with electricity and water and everything else, there's got to be some practice, some attempt at free speech in some perhaps limited context, so that over time, so as the 100 years of Pakistani history develops, maybe there will have been some baseline and then some further development, to some extent happening along with the other processes. Of course, I'm not in any way a regional expert in Pakistan, so this is just a theoretical contribution.
Absolutely. If I may just build upon that, completely agree with everything Brian has said, but I live in Montreal. And we're living here in the West, and we can completely agree on that. When it goes to that context, the freedom of speech kind of rests upon the notion that any idea could be wrong and any idea could be right. And we're juggling that concept at the same time. When it comes to the quote unquote unaltered word of God, that is the Holy Quran and the religion, then that sentimentality kind of disappears and people end up being emotionally attached to it. I'll give you a very clear example. There are people, I may have been one of them at a point of time, who do not really practice the faith as it's meant to be practiced. They don't pray as many times, they don't give to charity and so on and so forth. And if you ask them, do you consider yourself a good Muslim? Yeah, I'm okay. Oh, but say one word against their country or against their religion and they'll come out with swords and try to end your life, because they attach some primal protective mentality to protecting the idea of God. And we had, in India, there were a couple of movies made about this in the last 10 years where you're kind of juggling with the notion of God, but they're also tried to be very, very sensitive and tried to be very, very balanced. And the theaters were attacked, shut down, the stars and actors went into hiding. It's just, I wonder if we have a way of developing society to that point where that is possible. I don't see it happening, as Mariam said, in the next 10 to 15 years, not at all. But I don't see it happening in the next 50 years, to be honest, because an honest discussion about what is merit-based, religiously correct, as opposed to just correct because it feels good to you, your sentimentality. I don't think we've had that discussion. And more often than not, in the climate over the last 20 years with Islam, people are very, very afraid of expressing opinions that stray away from the norm, Muslims included. So I wonder, I don't disagree with anything you've said, Brian, but I don't see it happening.
Thanks.